Hi, I am Lars-Эрик Unestol from Sweden, and I had hoped to be with you in person in this important conference. However, it has not been possible, so we will have contact in this way instead. And we will have a little more than 1 hour together about mental training. Before we start, I should like to say that for me it's very important before everything I am doing to ask what is the purpose. And in this way we can say that normally we say the purpose of this hour is to provide information, to provide knowledge. But this is not any longer enough for me. So I'm seldom working with just information and providing knowledge. I differ very much between knowledge and competence. And the difference is that it's first when we start to apply the knowledge that we will get competence. I got a call from University Hospital some months ago, and they asked, can we have 1 day with you about feedback? We will be about 300 people from the hospital. And I said, yes, you can, but then you have to promise to train for 7 weeks. I have made a special training program, feedback, for 7 weeks. And they said, all right, we will ask about that. And then they phoned some days later and said, okay, we agree. And then we met. We had 1 day, and they got the training program. And 4 months later I got the result, and they said it has never been such an effect of a one day education. And this is how I try to work, that it's rather meaningless to just talk about something if it doesn't lead to action, to doing. And mental training is such a thing that you do. It's the same as physical training. You can read 10 books about conditioning. You can listen to 2 days about strength training. Nothing will happen until you start to apply it and to try it, to test it yourself. And the same with mental training. Something you do in order to get effect. So before we start, I wanted to tell that my hope is that this hour will not only provide interest, curiosity, knowledge, some insights, but that it will lead to what is important, that you will start to use mental training, to try it in practice in your life. Okay, I have a number of PowerPoints, and the first one is about 50 years with mental training, or all PowerPoints is about that. And the first one is a little overview over what has happened during 50 years. From the start in the early 60s at Uppsala University, and the start of the actual mental training concept, 69, and then application in different areas up till now. And I will just make a short overview over that. So let's start with the background research during the 60s. When I came to Uppsala, I was interested of 3 things, because I was an athlete, and if you're an athlete, or interested of sport, you will probably be interested to know why the performance goes up and down like this, not only from competition to competition, but during the same competition. So and this is of course related to what happens in the brain. So the connection between body-mind, mind-body was the first area of my interest. The second one was that everyone in sport and many outside sport has experienced flow sometimes. When things goes by itself, you make a very good result and still you don't use the same effort as normally. Flow is a wonderful state, but it's very difficult to control. And I couldn't control it when I came to Uppsala. So that was the second area to look into: what is flow and how can we learn to use it in a good way. The third area was training. Training at that time was related to physical training. So my question was, could the training concept be applied also to other areas of life, to mental processes? Could you train your thoughts? Could you train your feelings, your attitudes? Could you train your personality? And so on. So I started to try to develop training programs for the mental area. And this led to 1969 to the that I published an article about what I called mental training. And it created a lot of interest from the beginning, especially by sport. And sport became the first area for application of mental training. So during the 1970s, I worked with a number of national teams and 2 Olympic teams to work out practical training methods. And sport was very good to work to start with, because it's more easy to measure the effects in sport, where you can measure in centimeters and seconds compared with other areas of life. And already here's a view from the second Olympics at the Moscow. I picked it out because I talked to you in Moscow now. And at that time we could see the relation between how successful you were at the Olympics and how much you have been training. This can be explained in 2 ways: that people who are elite are more interested in mental training, or that mental training makes you better, and probably it was both of the effects. It was also good to come from sport to the third area, which was schools, because when you come from sport, it's an acceptable area. If you come from clinical areas or sports psychology or psychology, people often relate that to problems. You need to have some problems to go to sports psychologist. But mental training becomes related to becoming better. The sport model, which means that you can have a good conditioning and still you continue to train to get still better, from good to great concept. And that made it much more easy to be accepted in schools, because school children looked up to athletes, and what was good for them seems to be good for children also in school performance, for instance. The 1980s areas was business, health. In terms of business, worked with different companies. And just to mention one example, the first company, the telecom in Sweden, had 40,000 employees, and they wanted mental training to reach everyone. And it took 2 years, and with a special strategy, we succeeded to get the mental training, especially goals and motivation, out to every one of the 40,000 people. And that became a good model in order to spread mental training to everyone in the company. Up till now, I worked with over half of the 100 biggest companies in Sweden. And it has been a lot of different applications that I will not go into here. Another area has been leadership, of course, and also mental training for special areas of business like sales and so on. The third, another area in the 1980s became stage performance, which was a wide field at that time. But the interest for mental procedures was very big. And I worked with a lot of different stage performance institutions during the 80s. And it was very thrilling for me also to go into that area, which is a very special area of performance, different from athletes' performance. For instance, when I worked with Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra, the first time I met them was half a year before they should go on a world concert tour. So the first question was, how many of you want to become a better musician? And everyone said, yes, of course. The next question, how many of you have a very specific, concrete image in your head what the difference will be between now and the time when you are a better musician? No one had this developmental picture in their head. And of course it's very difficult to be better if you don't know in here what better means. So the musical and singing area was a very thrilling one. 1980s was also the area where I tried to work out the applications of mental training into clinical areas. And I made a lot of studies with different hospitals. It was very important for me to see mental training as a complementary medical procedure, not as an alternative. And for me it has been very easy to work together with the medical expertise, because they have never seen mental training as a threat against the medical area. They have seen it as an important complement, and in some areas not only complement but also something which can give a method where the medical treatment doesn't work, or where there is no medical treatment available. One example of all these investigations, sleep disorders, of course, has been a very important one, because like many other countries, big percentage of Swedish people have sleeping problems, going to sleep, but mostly what I've been working with the last years has been the quality of sleep. It's not so important of how many hours we sleep. The important thing is the quality. The first 4 hours of deep sleep, which gives the recovery for the body. So it has been divided into 2 areas, helping people to go to sleep. And when I am traveling in Sweden, I meet many people who says, I go to sleep with you every evening. And that has been one important thing, because, as you know, sleeping drugs has important side effects. So replacing drugs with the mental training has been very good things. And the other thing has been to work to improve the sleep quality, which is another area. Let me take some other example. Tinnitus is an area where there is no medical treatment which has been effective. And the study I made many years ago at Gothenburg Sahlgrenska Hospital, University Hospital, was interesting. I had been, just before this study, I was in Brazil. Brazil has been a very interesting country for me, with all the trans phenomena there, and I've stayed there now and then. And at that time, like 30 years ago, when I had an apartment close to Copacabana, I was on my way home in the morning along the Copacabana, and there was very little people. Suddenly I met 2 women, and when they just passed me, one of them jumped up to me and put her hands around my neck and started to kiss me. And of course I got very astonished, and it took some seconds for me to free myself and continue. And then half a minute later I detected that everything was gone, with tickets and money and everything I had. So I started to think about this idea with pocket thieves, that they catch attention, and if you are attended, if you are concentrated on something, you get dissociated from everything else. So I started to think, maybe we can use that in treatment. Maybe it could be possible to take away the focus on, for instance, tinnitus. Place the sound in the back of your head and normally don't notice it. So we made this study in Sahlgrenska, and after 3 months of mental training, most of the 70 patients had learned this strategy. They could detach, dissociate from the sound. So when you ask them, do you have this problem anymore? And they say, no, the sound is gone, but I can take it forwards whenever I like. So it was there, but outside their awareness. And that method became very important. So in Helsingborg Hospital, where we have worked very much with chronic pain, we use the same technique with chronic pain. And of the many thousands patients, if you meet them and ask, you have had chronic pain for so many years, yes? How is it now? No, it's gone. It's really gone? Yeah, I can take it forwards whenever I like. It's there somewhere, but normally I don't notice it. So that method has been very interesting. Let me also mention about cancer, because we made one study with 300 cancer patients from one hospital. We took all the cancer patients in the hospital, divided them in 2 groups, experimental group, control group. The 3 best doctors made the matching, so it should be equal between the groups. And they got the same medical treatment, but the difference was that the experimental group also got mental training. What we could see during the control period was that it was only half of the number of deaths in the experimental group compared with the control group. So, okay, that was some investigation, but this meant a lot to make mental training as an acceptable and desired complement in medical area. Time doesn't allow me to go more into that. 1990s became the start of the revolution in personal development. Suddenly, most people that you met wanted to start their personal development, lifelong development. And mental training became the main issue to work with that. So the main course in the 2 years university course in mental training has the name Personal Development Through Mental Training. And there it was also important to find out what does it mean to improve in life, to be successful. So I worked very much to find what is the difference between successful and not successful people, starting with sport and then going outside. And very quickly I can say that I found 4 principles of success. The self-image was the first one. And of course, the self-image is composed by different parts. The goals, motivation and goal images, second part. How we look upon the future. The attitude was the third part, how we interpret life. Then there was the 4 parts, our well-being, our inner feelings, emotions, moods. However, the people who are successful in career and in sport and so doesn't necessarily have the 4 factor. So I started to divide success in external success and internal success. And internal success was the well-being, feeling well. And what I could see later was that the internal success was not a result of external success, which most people think. If I succeed in life externally, then I will feel satisfied, happy. It's not so. It has very little to do with each other. So the effect of that was that we could start with the internal success. We don't have to wait for that until we have been successful externally. And that has been a very important message for many people, that They don't have to wait for happiness and satisfaction until they have everything outside in order. The second area during the 1990s was research together with a Russian research team from St. Petersburg, and we worked together from the Olympics in Seoul up till year 2000, a little more than 10 years. And the work together had two parts. One was the application of the Swedish mental training into schools, into health, into sport. The Olympic Committee in Russia translated the programs to Russian. That was one part. The second part, which became very important, was the research. We made a lot of research to see what happens when we are training mentally. And we had a lot of articles in different journals about that. And I will come back to that when we look into what happens in the brain when we go into a mental training state. Then during the last 2 decades, it has been much of integration between the mental training and other areas. One area is coaching. I wrote a book called Coaching with Mental Training, where we try to combine these two areas. Combination with cognitive psychology, combination with ACT, combination with mindfulness, and so on. And also continue some interesting research. It has also been some international projects, and one project which is close to my heart is in Iraq. Together with the government in North Iraq, we started some years ago a project called Mental Training for Peace. From inner peace to outer peace. And where we have tried to reach everyone in Kurdistan, North Iraq, with translated mental training programs to Kurdish. Okay, let's look into definition. What is mental training? It's a systematic training. It's a long-term training, and it's a developmental training, from good to better, or from present to future. What do we work with? It's with mental processes, thoughts, images, feelings. It's mental skills and attitudes. And what is the goal? The goal is two areas: peak performance, to function better in work, in school, in sport, in relations, and at the same time feel good, well-being. There are 3 parts of mental training. It's the basic mental training, which gives, as it says, the base for the next part, which is the mental training. And the mental training has 2 parts. It's the one part is this lifelong developmental training, personal development, and the other part is problem solving. The third part is mental preparation for future events. When we have the mental training, we can prepare future in a certain way. The Police Academy in Stockholm had used mental trainings for 30 years, and they have it during 1 year. And when they have learned mental training, in the mental room then they can take the police instructions and translate that to images and program these into the mental room. This means that if you read the police instruction that when you come to a situation when someone starts to shoot at you, then you shall do this, this, this. This is intellectual instructions. They will often disappear when you come into such a situation because you get stressed and your prefrontal lobe starts to function less good, and you act in a way which you can't understand afterwards. When you do it, when you program these instructions into the inner mental room, then you will automatically function in the right way, even when you come into stress situations. And this is the method which also athletes are using. They are programming what you should do during a competition before, so when you come to the competition, you act automatically in the right way. You don't have to think. Because if you start to think, then you leave the automaticity and the performance goes down. So this is something very important that can be used in all areas of life. Where you have the mental training, you can prepare for the future in a quite different way than if you don't have the mental training. Training, mental training, half of the word is training. So of course the training model is the key model for effective and sustainable change. This means to see life as a do-it-yourself project. An empowerment model. You leave the responsibility over to the client, like you do in coaching. But the difference between coaching and mental training is that in mental training you also give the means for change. So by combining coaching and mental training, for instance, in the tasking part of coaching, where people have to do things until the next coaching session, then mental training is ideal to use for tasking. This self-doing thing means that I counted that up till now about a little more than 2.5 million Swedish people have used mental training. But of these 2.5 million I have met personally just some few thousand. And this is one of the main things with mental training, that the responsibility and the doing is handed over to a person. I was introduced some days ago in a setting where the person who introduced me said, "I'm so glad to meet Lars-Эрик Unestolь for the first time, because I have to thank him for the gold I took in the Olympics in sailing." And I started my talk by saying it was a very good example. She has been able to use my programs for success without knowing me, without meeting me. And that is the thing that can make mental training go all over the world. Because if we make people interested of the idea, then we can hand the training over to each one for self-training. Of course, it can be good to have a coach to get feedback and so on, get support for the training. Like all training, it's the same in physical training. It can be easier to train if you have support. The same with mental training, but it's not necessary, and you don't get dependent on some guru or some coach. It's based on the inner mental room. And what is the inner mental room? It's an operational definition of hypnosis. In the 60s, when I worked with alternative states of consciousness like flow, I also worked with, of course, with sleep and dream. But the main thing for me became hypnosis, and I also made my dissertation about hypnosis. Because I saw that hypnosis could be used in combination with mental training in a very effective way. I also show in some experiments in the 60s that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. You don't need an hypnotizer. I could record the induction, hypnotic induction on tapes, and when people listened to that, they got the same result as if I was there present. So the important thing was to get instructions how to do, but it didn't have to do through a living person. So when I started mental training, I knew that hypnosis should be a very important base for mental training. But on the other hand, it was very many misunderstandings about hypnosis. I had started the Swedish Society for hypnosis, and we also started education, but only for medical doctors, psychologists and dentists. And this has to do with that if you use hypnosis on other people, you need to be an expert not on hypnosis but on the thing that you are applying. So if I had a dentist in my course, I could say, you use hypnosis in the area you are expert on. You don't use it on internal medicine. That has to do with other experts. So, and so is it still today all over the world, that in the scientific hypnotic societies, hypnosis is only taught to people who are experts in some area. However, the last years I have developed what I call developmental hypnosis, which is that you use hypnosis not for clinical purpose, because in all societies in the world, hypnosis is connected with clinical hypnosis. But the new area now is developmental hypnosis, to use the concept of hypnosis for personal development, leadership development, and so on. Also, that I could show that you could do it yourself meant that we could have it as a part of mental training. But because of the misunderstanding, I decided not to call it hypnosis. I call it the inner mental room. And this was also a concept that I took from the athletes. When they had flow, they said, I am like in a room, protected from everything else that could disturb. The last years, the common thing has been to talk about being in the bubble, going into the bubble. It's the same thing. You go into yourself, and in this hypnotic state, it's possible to influence you in a quite different way than otherwise. So we can talk about the inner mental room as changing the brain into a new operating system which treat the information in a different way compared with when you are not in the mental room. It's handled in a different way. I'll come back to that, what happens in the brain. I have also developed the in the mental room to in the mental rooms or in the mental home, where I have different visual representations for depending on what you're doing in the mental room. If you're resting, recovering, or if you're working with your self-image, working with the future, and so on, working with your memories. So there are different rooms for different purposes. The flow state, which I was interested of the 60s, seems to be also a hypnotic state. It's various things that happens in flow is the things that happens in hypnosis or in the mental room. And I could take hundreds of examples of similarities of that, how perception is changed and things happens in order to help you to perform good. Slow motion, for instance, in speed sports. I work with Formula 1 and many of the other motorsports, and of course if you are going into 300-400 kilometers, it's very important to have the mind state where you slow down time and that you experience the speed in slow motion. What happens when we go into the mental room? Yes, when we look at EEG, you can see that there is an emphasis on the theta state, not alpha like in meditation. And theta seems to be more related to going deeper into the unconscious mind. Another thing seems to be a change that comes depending on if we measure the relation between the different frequencies. We found, and this was in the Russian-Swedish research, we found that the ratio was very similar to 1.6, which is the section divine. And I know that the golden number and section divine has been a popular thing in Russia. You even have a museum of phi. This stands for harmony, balance, beauty. And if you remember, it has been with us from the start with the pyramids in the Greek temples. It has been in different architectural things during the years, Notre Dame, United Nations, in everyday projects. If you take a license or whatever, it has this relation. Everywhere in the human body, and even in the DNA, you have this relation. In the face is the only thing around the world in the different cultures which are related to beauty. Has to do with the section divine relations in the face. You have it in the quantum physics, and you have it in the solar system. And one of the most interesting things happened when NASA sent out data from new instruments to measure the background radiation in the world. And after analysis, it was clear that the whole universe is based on section divine. Why do I mention that? Yes, when we found that the brain has this section divine measures in the mental room, we said maybe that's a sign that the ideal state in the human being also mentally has to do with section divine. And so I continued to look into other areas, and then I found that it was the same in the heart, that if you look at the big peak, small peak to big peak, when you are in harmony or in the mental room, you have the 1 to 1.6. What I'm working with now is to look at breathing. We have noticed that there have been a lot of medical phenomena the last 30-40 years that has not been able to explain with medical reasons. So one idea is now can it have to do with the change of breathing patterns among population? That we breathe in a different way compared with ancient time. And breathing is so automatically that we don't think about how we are breathing. So when I looked into what is the optimal breathing, I couldn't find any study in the world who have shown this is the optimal breathing. So my hypothesis now is that it's the same as with section divine, that the relation between inhaling and exhaling should be 1 to 1.6. So, and if you make a break between inhaling and exhaling, it should be, has also to do with 1.6, but divided with 1.6. And this is very interesting to look into now. Another thing we found in the Swedish-Russian research was that the brain change its structure when you are in the mental room, so that the different activities levels out, so we'll have the same basic EEG activity in all 4 of the quadrants of the brain. It seems like the brain starts to act as an holistic brain, and this can explain why images, which I come back to, are so important to use and are so effective to use in the mental room, because images are also an holistic concept. So compared with cognitive therapies, which are working more with thoughts, mental training is working much more with images instead. Let me give an example of that holistic perspective. Here is one average archery shooter, and red is the left brain. No, of course, red is the right brain, and yellow is the left brain. So here we have a difference between left and right brain, and the gray zone is the optimal zone. If you compare this with her sister, which has the world record, when we measure her, we could see that 10 seconds before each shot, she had the same situation as her sister, more activity in the left brain. But during the last 10 seconds, she could interact, she could combine these two parts of the brain so that they were on the same level when the shots came. When we asked her, how do you know when you're going to shoot? She said, I don't know, but my body knows. The shot comes when my body is ready. And this is one sign of flow that you can hand over to the body. The body is doing it. And I've done a lot of interesting things by helping people, for instance in golf, to go from what I call MAC, where you are very intellectual and you look at distance and club and weather, and over to Tom, which empty the brain, and then come body and takes over the actual shooting. So handing over to the body is a very important part in elite sport. And this is what happens here. And the other thing which helps her is that when you let the body do the release of the arrow, it will be a much fine release than if you voluntarily will release. So you will have less tremor in the arrow if you have this automatic release by the body. They start then with basic mental training, and it has different purposes. Besides being a base for the rest of the training by learning the inner mental room, you also learn, for instance, relaxation. And learning relaxation is not only to be able to be relaxed, for instance, in the night during deep sleep. If you are relaxed in the day, you will not be able to do anything. You cannot even raise the finger. So in the day there is another state which is the ideal. It's not relaxation. It's a combination of tension and relaxation, which I call relaxence. I have created a word which is a combination of relaxation and tension. And the ideal state in the day means that you have the optimal tension in the agonist muscles, the muscles which are working, should work, and you have the relaxation in the antagonist muscles, the muscles which are working against what you're doing. This has been very important for everyone to learn, because it's not only sport that you need to know that and you need to apply that, but also in workplace or in general life. That because most people have a basic tension level. You have two kinds of tension. You have situation tension, and you have a basic tension level independent on the situation, which are there day and night. And most people today have too high basic mental tension, basic tension too high. And it means that the antagonist is working all the time. And you do things less good because you work against yourself. So learning relaxance is very important for every person to do. Also tension regulation, to regulate tension from different, because we need tension in certain situations, but not over tension or too little. Another is to learn active rest. And active rest is not to sit down and do nothing, because then the brain goes into what's called default mode network and start to use more energy compared when you were doing things before. So active rest means that you sit or lay down and then you focus on some perspective like the breathing. This is the normal thing in the mental training that we focus on. And then the brain goes down in activity. So it's a difference between rest and active rest. We save energy. We learn to be more effective by using less number of muscles. Less is doing more. Less tension is doing more results. And that is a part of flow, where you feel good results and you feel less effort. So effortless, good performance. And the last thing is for the deep sleep. Because people who are burned out, the old concept of burnout, we call it something else today in Sweden, they are asked to be home and rest until they can go back. But they have lost the ability to rest in the day, as I said, or in the night. They lose the deep sleep because the tension they have prevents the deep sleep. And they can sleep 10, 11, 12 hours and they will be as tired as when they went to bed. So it's not number of hours which is important, it's the quality. And here the basic training has a very, very important purpose to help people who have been burned out to come back before it gets chronical, and they can go on for months and sometimes years before they are back. In mental training, we work with mental processes, thoughts, images, emotions, behavior, and then we have attitude, which is a combination of thoughts, images, and emotions. As I said before, we work more with images than thoughts. Thoughts are overrated and in many ways, but it's also so that when we try to get control over our life, self-control is a very important part of mental training. My first book was called Self-Control by Mental Training, and the control issue has been very important. And thoughts has been much more difficult to control than images. When I started mental training, people asked, mental training, is that the same as positive thinking? No, I say it's not the same thing. Positive thinking is one part, but only one part. And they said, very good, because I'm so fed up with positive thinking. A lot of books is written about think positive. But what can I do about that? I cannot help what thoughts are coming into my mind. And I often get thoughts I don't want to have. And then I get bad conscience because I think I should think positive, but I cannot. So I made one experiment asking people which of positive or negative thought images do you want to have? And they said, of course I want the positive. Next question, which of these two catch your mind more easily? And the mind was more easily caught by thoughts and negative thoughts, which you didn't want to have. Then people tried to get rid of these thoughts, and they found that if they use the dominant system of control, which is a voluntary effort, they try to get rid of the thoughts, they came back still more. Many experiments have shown that if you try to prevent a negative thought, it will come more and more easily and more often. So it was needed other methods, and one of the main thing in mental training was to provide alternative system of control, and I will look into that a little more. So we have the alternative state of consciousness, which is easier to define than consciousness. We had the World Congress in Consciousness in Stockholm some years ago, and there is no definition of consciousness that are accepted by every expert. So it's much more easy to define alternative states of consciousness like sleep, dream, in the mental room, hypnosis. Alternative system of control. Yeah, we need to have that. And I mentioned that my first book was about that. The dominant system is the voluntary effort, which is the normal system. We try to do things, we fight. And we detect very soon that this is not the best way. It can be very ineffective, and it also can give the opposite result. So when you try hard to get something, you get the opposite result. If you try hard in the evening to go to bed, to go to sleep, you will stay awake still longer. If you focus too hard in the wrong way by voluntary effort, you will get difficulty to focusing also. So it has the opposite effect in many areas. Actually, if I can mention one interesting example of that, some time ago I should have a lecture for some 100 people, and the person who should introduce me came up and said, "I want to start with a very important message. I just got a phone call from a woman who said that Lars-Эрik Unestål has made her pregnant." And then he stopped. I didn't understand what he meant, and it was completely silent in the audience. He made this break very long for me and for the other. Then he continued, "Oh, it's not so dangerous." She phoned from the hospital and explained that she had tried to get pregnant for years without success. Then she gave up and started with mental training and got pregnant. Now she wanted to phone and thank. And I've got many such statements from people who have tried without success, and then they relax and succeed. In many areas it seems to be like that. If you try to be happy, you will never be happy, and so on. So the important thing to find alternative system of control has been very important in mental training. And two of the most common that I use is images and triggers. Mental training starts with creating your future, writing your life manuscript, creating a vision, creating goals, translating goals to goal images, creating memories of the future by programming the goals into the inner mental room, and then start the training. And in the training, living in the present. So here's a thing that if you do goal setting in the non-mental training way, then goals will often become, if they are brave and high, often become stress factors. Will I succeed? Thoughts about the future in a negative way, and so on. When you have made a programming of the goals, this means that they will be there and will be a kind of a directing factor for the automation life. So you can live in the present and enjoy the present on the way to the goals. So enjoyment will not be a part of the goal reaching. Enjoyment will be a part of the process towards the goals and the vision. I use the past in a different way. I use it as a gold mine, somewhere we can pick up treasures, pick up our resources, the good feelings we've had, good situations that we can use, and so on. And then in the mental room, for instance, I can ask an athlete, where did you make your best competition? 3 years ago I had flow. Okay, in the mental room, go back to that situation, and there's experiential memory, not intellectual memory. So the feeling will come again. Then there is a conditioning procedure. This feeling will be connected with a trigger which the athlete can use in the coming competition. And then he can provide the flow without having to try to provide the flow, because it doesn't help. He can get it to come automatically by using triggers. So triggers are very important for all kinds of feelings and emotions, and so I can take another example of triggers. In the school program, I ask, for instance, children to pick out a study chair. They only use the chair for studying. Then in the mental room, they go back to an early situation where they were totally focused on something. It doesn't have to be in school, it can be sport or whatever. And when they have this feeling of focusing, then they see themselves sitting on the chair. So you make a conditioning procedure between the feeling and the chair, which means that when they use the chair, then the focusing will be there. The next step is when they come to school and shall for an exam. In order to remember what they read on the chair, they close their eyes and see themselves sitting on the chair. And then the memory will come from what they read. Very short about the main model that I use, the developmental model, which means that it's different from the clinical model. Clinical model, you wait until you have some problems. You go to a psychologist if you have some problem. You go to medical if you have some medical problem. Health is regarded as a zero health. If you don't have medical or health problems, you have health. But according to the model of development, I like to define health as WHO. Health is an optimal physical, psychological and social well-being. Who of us can say that we have health? Every one of us can work for developing health. So instead of looking at the starting point, we look at the goal. Independent if you start on the clinical area or the other area, the goal is the excellence, to develop lifelong towards excellence. That's why we call this conference in June the Mind Training for Excellence in Sport and Life. This is another model which I will not go into. Will take too long time. A very simple model to observe, note, accept, not evaluate or react, in order to take away negative thoughts. Here's my learning pyramid for education. Learning in life, for life, from life, about life, and learning throughout life. And every part of this is related to learning principles. And this is very well related to the mental training, as mental training is learned in life, you learn it yourself, and you apply it to every situation in life, day by day. I work with competence instead of knowledge, as I said, and so the main thing is to go on from knowledge to competence by practice, application and training. I also have some studies or some ideas about how to be competent without knowledge, because when I ask people who are social competence, they said, if I ask how many courses do you have gone in social competence, and no one, do you know how you are doing? No, I'm just myself. So here we have a competence which you don't know how to do, but you're still competence. So there must be direct ways from information over to competence, which I work with now, and it's very interesting because in Sweden, when I work with the schools, it's also because I work with what I call life skills training in the school system. And this has to do with that the relation between what you learn in school and life is very little relation. If you take school success and life success, there are rather small relations between these two things. Because school is learning, the goal is school success is knowledge, the goal in life competence is to handle situations that you meet in life. And you can be an expert on something. You can be an expert, as I said, in conditioning and still have bad conditioning yourself. So it has been very important to take down this gap between knowledge and competence, because now many Swedish companies, when you come and ask for a job, they don't look at your remarks from school. And then I ask them, what do you look for instead? And they say, I look for social competence, I look for how you work together with other people, how independent you are, emotional competence and so on. So that's a very interesting area, which I think is the same situation in many other countries. This is one of the main models for me. However, we don't have time to say much about that, more than I mentioned before, that the intellectual goals will be translated to goal images, and then they are programmed into the inner mental room. And then things happen in a very interesting way. If I take just very short one example that you could relate to. When you go to your work with your car, first time you had to think about the way. 3 weeks later, you come to your work and you have been thinking about other things on the way. If I ask you, who was driving the car? It cannot be you, because you were thinking of other things. You will probably say, oh, it must be my autopilot. Yes, right. What is an autopilot? It's something which you program on the goal and which takes over the way to the goal. It seems that we have a neuropsycho-cybernetic model working in the same way, with autopilots which are programmed. The unfortunate thing is that programs can be negative, it can be positive. And as I said before, most people have more easy to develop a negative program in their head than the positive. And this works as effective, but in the wrong way. It takes you to the thing you don't want to in life. So as long as you don't know about this, and as long as you haven't learned mental training to change the negative programming to positive ones, then you can fight and you can try and you can struggle your whole life. You will never succeed. So this model is, of course, a basic model in mental training. Okay, time goes, so I will not go into so much more to say. When this is about stress management, we start with the basic mental training, then comes the mental technique training with imagery and visualization, thoughts and triggers and so on, inner talk. Then comes the special programs, and they have different lengths depending on purpose. Here's one program for 27 weeks for sport. Here's one for personal development during half a year. Here's one for preparation for competition. Here's one mental skills training for focus with triggers. Here's one for creativity, problem solving, where let me just say here that the Nobel Prize was given to Kahneman some year ago, who was dividing the problem solving, decision making into two areas: slow thinking or fast thinking. Slow thinking, which is more of the rational thinking, and when you go think about things time after time. Fast thinking, more impulsive, you make a quick decision. I have developed a third system in mental training I call the third system, which is that you state the problem and then you hand it over to your inner mind to be solved. You start a creativity process without having to do with the conscious thinking. And it saves energy, and often the solutions are better than in the other two ways. We have emphasis so much during the years rational thinking that it's important that we start to look at other ways than the rational thinking. One of my favorite is Einstein, and I call him the first mental trainer, and because he used so much of what is in the mental training for his own in his own life. He says, no one of my detections has come through rational thinking, even not one of his big detections. And there are many such examples. We need alternatives to rational thinking. Here's one experiment with the Swedish national swimming team when we went to Sydney, and in terms of jet lag, the mental training was better than melatonin, and also in order to measure the effect on the competitions. Made a lot of studies in different parts of the body. Let me just mention one example from the Russian-Swedish experiments. It's in the immunology. Before we show this, we only knew that the immune system goes down when you get stressed, or when you're training hard, or when you are depressed. But we were able to show that you can even increase the immune system over normal level by mental training. And that was made with a study with Russian athletes, and they used mental training for 6 weeks. Here's one example that 6 months of mental training could reduce the number of years biological with 7. So they got 7 years younger by 6 months of mental training. And when the Swedish newspapers was writing about this study, then they took example from Tony Blair, and they show the difference between before the Iraq War and some years later. He had changed, you could almost think, 20 years or so. So we have always known that stress increases aging. And of course, as cortisol goes down when you start to work with mental training, this was one reason why the biological age was decreasing with 7 years. So in the end, let me quote a very good friend of mine who was one of the first to use mental training in the 70s and 80s with very success in the Olympics. And he was also a very good advocate for mental training, and we made several films about mental training and him. When he finished, he said, the mental training played a very important role in my Olympic success. However, as important in the fact that I can benefit daily from these mental skills and attitudes in my post-sport career. When we finish conditioning training, when we finish strength training, it goes very quick down. But the mental training is not only learned, it's automatized in such a way that it will be there for the rest of the life. And Thomas will be one of them that you will meet in June this year. I hope all of you will come to Sweden in June for the 8th World Congress on Mind Training for Excellence in Sport and Life, where we'll go into these things much more deep, and you will listen to many other. There will be more than 80 speakers from the whole world coming, and you will meet many new friends there. So I hope to see all of you. Take contact with Marina, and she will help you to organize the travel till Sweden in June. Welcome.